In December 1931, a skull came out of a canyon east of Phoenix. An archaeological expedition found it, not a search party. It belonged to Adolf Ruth, a 66-year-old veterinarian from Washington, D.C., who had walked in 6 months earlier carrying an old Spanish map. The map was not with him. That map placed a fortune in gold inside a 5-mile circle centered on a rock spire called Weaver's Needle. Geologists say the rock there cannot hold it. Arizona has roughly 600 working mines and an estimated 120,000 abandoned ones. As of 2019, 2 state employees were responsible for the abandoned ones. 10 places made this list. We start at number 10, in the canyon that skull came out of. Stay until number 3. In western Arizona, there is a stone pyramid with a metal camel bolted to the top. It is a grave. If you like the places this country filed away and forgot, subscribe. Today we are counting down 10 Arizona places that should not be real. Number 10. Weaver's Needle. The Skull in Needle Canyon. You walk in from the south, up a wash of loose stone, and for the first 2 miles you see nothing but canyon wall. Then the trail flattens onto bare bedrock at a place called Fremont Saddle. The ground opens, and there it is. A single column of rock standing 1,000 feet above everything around it. Red-brown, vertical, wrong. Saguaro on the slopes below. Mesquite in the draws. Cliff faces and hoodoos stacked behind it in every direction, and no sound at all except wind moving through the canyon walls. There is no building in view. There is no road. The nearest pavement is 8 miles of washboard gravel behind you, and after that you walk. The Apache associated this range with thunder. It is not difficult to understand why. The spire is Weaver's Needle, named for Paulino Weaver, a 19th century mountain man and scout. Geologically, it is an accident. 25 million years ago, this was a volcanic field, and what remains is welded ash flow tuff, fused volcanic ash, eroded down around a harder core until only the core was left standing. The summit sits at 4,555 feet. It stands inside the Superstition Wilderness, roughly 160,200 acres of Tonto National Forest with about 180 miles of trail through it. Nobody lives there. Nobody ever has. What people do is look for gold. That began with Jacob Waltz, a German immigrant prospector who died in Phoenix in 1891, leaving behind high-grade gold ore and either a deathbed map or a deathbed silence, depending on who is telling it. The story would probably have stayed local. Then in January 1895, the San Francisco Chronicle ran an article by P.C. Bicknell that did something folklore usually cannot do. It gave a coordinate. The mine, it said, lay inside a circle about 5 miles across. In the center of that circle was Weaver's Needle. That sentence turned a rock formation into an address. Adolf Ruth arrived in Mesa in May 1931. 66 years old, a veterinarian carrying an old Spanish profile map he believed pointed at the same place. A rancher named Barkley told him not to go. Wrong age, wrong season, and June in that country routinely runs past 110 degrees. Ruth went anyway. 2 ranch hands packed him into a camp at Willow Spring in West Boulder Canyon on the 13th of June. On the 14th, he wrote home that he was just north and west of Weaver's Needle. That is the last anyone heard from him. In December, an archaeological expedition sponsored by the Arizona Republic and led by the city archaeologist of Phoenix, Odd Halseth, found his skull in Needle Canyon. The rest of him turned up the following January, along with his compass, his thermos, his topographic map, and a .44 revolver. The Spanish map was not there. Here is the detail that stops people cold. The skull went to Alish Hrdlicka at the Smithsonian, the first curator of physical anthropology at the U.S. National Museum. He examined it and concluded Ruth had probably died from a gunshot. Then he filed the report in his personal papers. It was never signed. It was never notarized. Arizona authorities never accepted it, and the separation of the skull from the body has long been attributed to animals rather than to anything a person did. 95 years later, the most authoritative examination of the most famous death in these mountains is a document nobody officially recognizes. and the map was wrong regardless. The central superstitions are volcanic rock, welded tough and rhyolite and dacite, laid down by an ancient cauldron complex. The documented gold in this area came out of the Goldfield district at the western edge of the range, outside the wilderness entirely. Geologists have said for decades that this is the wrong stone to hold the mine everyone keeps walking in to find. You can go today. The Peralta Trail runs about 12.4 miles out and back with roughly 1,360 feet of climbing. The Needle is climbed regularly. The wilderness is open year-round and rescues are frequent. A man followed a sentence in a newspaper to a rock made of the wrong kind of stone and died of it. People are still following it. Number 9. Ruby. 6 bodies and 1,000,000 bats. The Ruby Mercantile was a general store 4 miles from the Mexican border, and between February 1920 and July 1922, 6 people were killed in and around it. The Fraser brothers bought the place in February 1920. 11 days later, 2 men walked in with guns and shot them both. The next owners, the Pearsons, were robbed and killed in August 1921. Same store, 18 months apart. The men responsible for the second killing were caught after trying to sell gold teeth taken from the scene. Then in July 1922, they escaped custody and killed 2 more men doing it, and the response stopped being a police matter. The book written about the case describes roughly 700 volunteers from 4 counties, the first aircraft ever used to chase criminals in Arizona, and the largest manhunt in the history of the Southwest. Ruby's problem was never crime. It was geography. It sat in Bear Valley, 4 miles from the line, in years when the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution was still bleeding north, and the Mercantile was the only building for miles holding cash. The town existed for the Montana mine, worked since 1877, which became the largest producer of zinc and lead in the state alongside gold, silver, and copper. In the 1930s, about 1,200 people lived there, and the school had around 150 students. The mine closed in 1940. By the end of 1941, the town was empty. It is still standing. Over 24 roofed buildings, the schoolhouse with its chalkboards up, the jail, the mine offices, the warehouse, the head frame, the infirmary, houses. 2 small blue lakes sit behind an old dam, ringed by sand dunes made of mine tailings, which gives the whole valley the look of a beach that got lost. It is privately owned. You arrange a permit, you pay a fee, and you can camp and fish there. You are also told plainly not to walk the hillside behind the warehouse. The main shaft ran about 700 feet down with lateral bores extending some 2,000 feet, and water has been working on it for 80 years. Large sections have caved in. The shafts are not empty, though. An estimated 1.5 million Mexican free-tailed bats live in them, and in season, at dusk, they come out. 6 people were murdered in that store. The loudest thing in Ruby now is the sound of the mine breathing out. Number 8. 2 guns. The man who sold the cave. Here is the thing about 2 guns. Everything that made it famous was a product, and the product was other people's dead. It sits on the rim of Canyon Diablo in Coconino County, on what used to be Route 66 between Flagstaff and Winslow. The commercial logic was simple. The cars were going past anyway. The only question was how to make them stop. Harry E. Miller's answer was a massacre. According to accounts, largely traced back to the writer Gladwell Richardson, in 1878, Navajo fighters trapped a raiding Apache party in a limestone cave beneath the site and lit fires at the mouth of it. 42 Apache died. The place became known as the Apache Death Cave. Miller leased land there from Earl and Louise Cundiff in the 1920s, took the name Chief Crazy Thunder and an Apache identity he did not have, and built an attraction on top of it. A zoo along the canyon rim with cages of brick and chicken wire holding mountain lions, bobcats, snakes, and birds. A restaurant, a souvenir store. He ran tours down into the death cave and wired it with electric lights. He commissioned fake ruins near the entrance to improve the atmosphere. And he sold the bones. The Apache remains he took out of that cave were sold as souvenirs to the same tourists he was charging to walk through it. What happened next is why people around there began using the word curse. In 1926, after an argument over the lease, Miller shot and killed Earl Cundiff. He was attacked repeatedly by his own animals, the mountain lion and the lynx among them, and developed a severe infection. His store burned in 1929. He left around 1930. Route 66 was rerouted away from the site in 1938 when a new bridge crossed the canyon. Then in the 1960s, a new owner rebuilt the whole thing. Service station, motel, tavern, another zoo. He even secured the site its own dedicated exit on the coming Interstate 40. In 1971, with the interstate about to open and the traffic about to arrive, fire destroyed the complex. Nobody rebuilt it again. The ruins are open and free. The stone arch of the zoo entrance, cages standing open to the sky with the wire long gone, a 2-story filling station, the old Canyon Diablo Bridge, and a graffitied abandoned campground next door. The cave is accessible, unlit and unmaintained. Structures are unstable. You reach it from exit 230, cross south, and you are standing in it inside a minute. It has its own exit and a constant hum of traffic a few hundred yards away, and almost nobody stops. After everything Miller did to make them stop, that is a fairly complete verdict. Number 7. Vulture City. 18 men and 1 tree. Phoenix exists because of this mine. That is not a figure of speech. In 1863, a prospector named Henry Wickenburg found a gold-bearing quartz outcrop about 12 miles from the town that now carries his name, and the mine that opened there needed feeding. There was no agriculture worth the name in the Salt River Valley. So a man called Jack Swilling went down and reopened irrigation canals that indigenous farmers had dug centuries earlier and grew food for the miners. The settlement that formed around that farmland became Phoenix. The route the grain traveled is still on the map. It is called Grand Avenue. The mine produced over 340,000 ounces of gold and 260,000 ounces of silver, which makes it the richest gold mine in Arizona history. At its peak, around 5,000 people lived at Vulture City. A remote camp with that much loose, high-grade ore lying around, no courts, no functioning jail, and no realistic prospect of a lawman arriving is going to develop its own legal code. It did. The crime that mattered was high-grading, stealing ore, because it was the only crime that touched the balance sheet. Sentence was carried out in front of Wickenburg's own stone cabin on an ironwood tree. 18 men are said to have been hanged from it. The tree is still standing. It was already several hundred years old when they started using it. The camp had everything else too: a schoolhouse, a blacksmith, a brothel, a chow house, an assay office with an underground vault for the gold bars. In 1923, an accident collapsed a section known as the Glory Hole, and the remains of 7 men and 12 burros are still down in it. The mine was finally shut by a regulatory agency in 1942. Henry Wickenburg did not get rich. He spent his last years trying to collect money the mine's owners owed him and never got it. On the 14th of May, 1905, he shot himself. You can visit. It is privately owned, restored, self-guided, open seasonally from roughly October to mid-May. Over a dozen original buildings stand. Some are stabilized, some are deliberately left alone. You can stand over the Nichols Raise and look down about 170 feet of open shaft. The man whose discovery seeded a state capital died broke in the desert, and the thing that outlasted all of them is the tree they used for hangings. Number 6. Swansea. The town that shipped its rock around Cape Horn. There is a ghost town in the western Arizona desert named after a city in Wales, and the reason is that for years, Wales is where the rock went. Copper was found in this corner of La Paz County around 1862, but there was no smelter within thousands of miles. So the economically rational move, genuinely the sensible option, was to load Arizona ore onto a train to the Colorado River, put it on a ship in the Gulf of California, sail it around Cape Horn, and land it at Swansea in South Wales, where the smelters were. 2 miners, Newton Evans and Thomas Jefferson Kerrigan, raised the money to end that. By the close of 1908, they had a 350-ton furnace going up, a 3.5-mile water pipeline running from the Bill Williams River, and hoists for 5 shafts. The smelter opened in 1909. The town took the name of the Welsh port it had been feeding, and most of the people living there would never see it. By 1909, the population had reached 500, according to the Bureau of Land Management. The Arizona and Swansea Railroad began running from Bouse in 1910. Then it went wrong almost immediately. Financial trouble closed the mines in 1911, there was a brief reopening in 1912, and in 1914 the American Smelting and Refining Company bought in and rebuilt much of the town. At its height, it reportedly had a car dealership, a moving picture theater, a lumber yard, and its own electric light company, sitting at 1,283 feet in open desert. Copper prices fell after the First World War. The post office closed in June 1924. The mines finished for good in 1937. It is a BLM site now, free to visit, about 25 miles of graded gravel out of Parker or Bose, rough at the end, adobe and brick walls, the railroad grade, foundations, 2 cemeteries, and rusting car bodies scattered across the ground. The BLM has put roofs back on a row of single miners' quarters, so you can stand in a doorway a man stood in a century ago and look out at exactly the same empty valley. The industry that explains the name has been gone for 89 years. The name is still on the map. If you are finding this one interesting, a thumbs up genuinely helps it reach people. And if you have ever pulled over at a ruin or a strange sign on an Arizona back road, tell me about it in the comments. That is where a lot of these locations come from. Number 3 is still ahead. That is the one I mentioned at the start. Number 5. The domes. The buildings that were never used. For 40 years, there were 4 concrete structures standing in open desert south of Casa Grande that looked like something that had landed rather than something that had been built. 3 were long and segmented like caterpillars. 1 was a saucer. They sat off Thornton Road just south of Interstate 8 with nothing around them to give a sense of scale, graffiti on every surface, both ends open to the weather. They were not a cult site. They were not a military project. They were a circuit board factory. Intercon Technology was an electronics firm founded in Mountain View, California in 1968. In October 1981, it got zoning approved for a 135-acre site in Pinal County, and in July 1982, construction began. The method is the part worth pausing on. They anchored giant balloons to the foundations, braced them with steel frames, sprayed about 3 inches of polyurethane foam over the outside, then covered that with about 3 inches of concrete. When it cured, they deflated the balloon and used it again on the next one. Each building took roughly 6 weeks and cost around $150,000. The shape was chosen because it was cheap, fast, and good at keeping desert heat out. 7 buildings were planned, 4 were finished. The company intended to be manufacturing there in early 1983. Instead, in 1983, Intercon defaulted on a loan and the bank took its assets. The company dissolved in 1986. Beyond a single office, the site was never used for anything at all. By December 1988, it was formally described as abandoned, and because nothing on the site explained itself, people supplied their own explanation: rumors of occult activity. Then in 2016, a ghost hunting television show filmed an episode there and visitor numbers jumped. Pinal County condemned the structures in 2017 on safety grounds. The owners fought it and lost. Demolition began on the 9th of January, 2023. The buildings were down inside the week. There is flat ground and a road there now. Of everything on this list, it is the only one you have already missed. 40 years of being mistaken for a mystery when the real story was that somebody had a good idea and ran out of money. Number 4. Grand Canyon Caverns, the hotel room under the fallout shelter. On a remote stretch of historic Route 66, about 25 miles west of Seligman and 63 miles east of Kingman, you can book a hotel room 220 feet underground. It has beds, a rock ceiling 70 feet above them, and running water carried down by hand. It is reportedly among the quietest rooms anywhere because nothing lives down there. No insects, no rodents, no dripping, no wind. The temperature holds at 62 degrees all year. Everything strange about this place follows from one geological fact. The caverns are dry. They are the largest dry caverns in the United States. No water means no stalactites, no stalagmites, no decay, and nothing alive. A woodcutter named Walter Peck found the way in during 1927. The Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration built a proper entrance in 1935. In 1962, a 210-foot elevator shaft was blasted through the limestone, and the place was renamed from Dinosaur Caverns to Grand Canyon Caverns. The motel opened the following year. But in 1961, the federal government had looked at this Route 66 tourist cave and seen something else entirely. A sealed, temperature-stable chamber deep underground that needed no construction at all. It was designated a civil defense shelter, and during the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, it was stocked with rations meant to keep 2,000 people alive for about 2 weeks. Nobody ever took them out. Retrieving them would have cost money, leaving them cost nothing, and the dry air meant they never rotted. They are still down there, still sealed, and they are on the standard tour. The Cavern Suite opened in 2012 in the largest chamber, which means anyone who books it sleeps in a room sharing its floor with the emergency supplies of a nuclear war that did not happen. There is a mummified bobcat down there too, called Bob, and the skeleton of a prehistoric giant sloth that left claw marks on the wall where it tried to climb out and could not. The site is fully open. Tours, ghost walks, spelunking trips, a 48-room motel on the surface, a restaurant. Route 66 kitsch on top and the Cold War underneath, and the only reason either one survived is that it never rains inside. Number 3. Quartzsite, the Camel Driver's Pyramid. This is the one I asked you to stay for. In a small cemetery off Interstate 10 in western Arizona, there is a pyramid built from multicolored petrified wood and quartz. It is 9 feet on each side at the base and 8 feet tall, and bolted to the top of it is a steel camel 2 feet high, facing west. It is a grave, and the camels were real. In 1856, the Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis, the same man who would later be president of the Confederacy, approved an experiment to replace horses with camels for hauling across the desert Southwest. Just over 70 animals were imported. The logic was sound, and on survey missions they performed well. They handled the ground and went long stretches without water. The problems were not logistical, they were social. Camels spooked horses and local livestock, cavalrymen disliked handling them, and when Davis left to run the Confederacy, the program lost the only patron who cared about it. The Camel Corps ran from 1856 to 1866. At the end of it, the surviving animals were auctioned off, and some were simply turned loose into the desert to work out their own arrangements. The drivers came with the camels. One of them was born Philip Tedrow, converted to Islam, took the name Haji Ali, and had it heard by Americans as Hi Jolly. He was discharged by the Army at Fort McDowell in 1870 and did not go home. He stayed another 40 years, working as a prospector, a scout, a mail courier, and a freight hauler, and settled in Quartzsite. He died there on the 16th of December, 1902, the first burial in what is now Hi Jolly Cemetery. The town thought enough of him to spend weeks stacking petrified wood into a pyramid over the grave. The Arizona Highway Department added the plaque and the camel in 1934, and the governor dedicated it the following year. It went on the National Register of Historic Places in February 2011. Every winter, the town fills with hundreds of thousands of people arriving in RVs for the gem shows. To reach the grave, you drive through a flea market. The United States Army brought 70 camels to Arizona, gave up, and let some of them go. The last man who looked after them is buried under a pyramid off the interstate. And most people doing 75 in the outside lane have no idea he is there. Number 2. Nothing. Founded 1977. There was a town in Mojave County called Nothing, and the population was 4. It sat on US 93 at milepost 148.5, the Phoenix to Las Vegas Road, about 100 miles northwest of Phoenix. Richard Kenworthy, known as Buddy, set it up in 1977 on a completely sound business plan. Long drive, no competition, so put a gas station, a store, a taco stand, and a bar there. The bar was called the Tain't Much Ado. What made it a legend rather than a filling station was the sign. It gave the founding year and the elevation, 3,269 feet, and then, in the flat register of a Chamber of Commerce proclamation, praised the citizens of Nothing for their hope, their faith, and their work ethic, noting that across the years they had had faith in nothing, hoped for nothing, worked at nothing for nothing. Marshall Trimble, Arizona's official state historian, stopped there in 1978 and confirmed the population figure. 4. Locals told travelers the name came from a group of drunks. A fire in 1988 took Kenworthy's businesses. He rebuilt the store and the garage. In 2005, he left, and that was effectively the end of it. Somebody bought the place after 2008 and tried a revival, which lasted under a year. The sign is still up. So is the graffitied shell of the store, which still carries a hand-lettered claim that 4 people live there. There are foundations, an empty lot where trucks pull in, and one of 4 highway department call boxes installed on that stretch of road. You are doing 65 when you pass it, and if you blink, you miss it, which was always the joke. Number 1. Tortilla Flat, population 6. The walls of the saloon are papered with dollar bills. So is the ceiling. Staff stopped counting a long time ago and know only 2 things about the money. It comes from 67 different countries, and adding more now requires a ladder. You sit on a bar stool made out of a saddle. There is an old toilet seat hanging off the boardwalk outside, and the sign that says Population 6 is not a bit. The town's own website says so in writing, slightly wearily. 6 people actually live there. Tortilla Flat is a 9.5-acre pocket of flat ground wedged into a canyon on the Apache Trail, about 11 miles northeast of Apache Junction. You reach it on a winding drive past Canyon Lake with the superstitions closing in on both sides, the same red volcanic rock that forms Weaver's Needle a few miles away, which is the point of it. This is the other end of the story this video started with. Before it was anything, it was a camping ground for prospectors hunting the lost Dutchman in those mountains. Then in 1904, it became a freight and stagecoach stop supplying the crews building Roosevelt Dam. It is named for a nearby flat where cowboys reportedly cooked tortillas over campfires, and the name first appears in Arizona newspapers that same year. It has never held more than 100 people, and the landscape has spent 120 years arguing with it. A flood in 1942 wrecked the place and drove most residents out. A fire later took the store, the restaurant, and the motel. Most of what stands now was rebuilt in the late 1980s, with the mercantile added in 2009. 2 bridges on the road outside are on the National Register: Mormon Flat, built 1924, and Boulder Creek, built 1937. 6 people is what is left after all of that. And it is still a town in the technical sense. It has a U.S. post office and a voting precinct, which makes it the smallest official community in Arizona to have both, and it calls itself the last surviving stagecoach stop on the Apache Trail. That is accurate. What is there today is a restaurant and saloon with a barbecue patio and live music from roughly mid-November to April, a country store selling prickly pear gelato and homemade fudge, a gift shop, and a museum and a replica schoolhouse standing where the first school opened in 1932. Several superstition trailheads start just up the road. Under the same peaks that killed Adolph Ruth, on 9 acres of canyon floor, 6 people run a bar with a band on the patio, saddles for chairs, and money from 67 countries stuck to the ceiling. The mountain kept the gold. They seem to be doing fine without it. 10 places, and we came down off the deep end of it, from a canyon where an archaeological expedition found a skull to a saloon with a band on the patio. For me, it is number 4. A hotel room 220 feet underground, sharing its floor with rations for a war nobody fought. That one will stay with me. Which of these surprised you most, and which Arizona place did we miss? Tell me in the comments. If this kind of forgotten American history is what you are after, subscribe.